Members of the town will continue and proceed to item 4, which is the draft minutes. If I can refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings, pages 9 to 13 of the meeting pack. Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting of 12th of September 2024 are a true reflection of proceedings?
Agreed.
Great. Okay. Moving on then to matters arising, no matters arising. And that brings us then to item 6, which is the 2023-769 proposal for the regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council on welfare of dogs and cats and their traceability. And that's for departmental oral evidence. Just to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard, and refer members to the relevant papers at 16 to 93 of the meeting pack, and there's only one item in the table papers, so which you'll find. Let me see, just check. Just to remind members that at its meeting on the 30th of May, the committee considered correspondence from the Cabinet Office in relation to a proposed new regulation on the welfare of dogs and cats and their traceability. The EU has indicated that it considers the proposal to be within the scope of the Windsor framework, and therefore may seek to add to the framework via Article 13.4. The applicability motion process would apply. As part of its examination of the Act, the committee agreed to request a departmental assessment of the impact and to invite officials to give oral evidence. And the departmental assessment of the impact is included in the table papers. So, members at this stage would just like to welcome Neil Gartland, the Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy Division, and Christopher Andrews, who's the Acting Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy, and welcome them to committee. Thank you for being here to present to us, and I'll just pass over to you at this stage to brief the committee.
Well, thank you, Chair, for the welcome. As you've already noted, my name is Neil Gartland, and I am the Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy Division within the department. I'm joined today by my colleague, Christopher Andrews, Deputy Director with specific responsibility for animal welfare policy. We aim to use this opportunity to provide the committee with some information on the draft proposal for European regulation on the welfare of cats and dogs and their traceability. However, I must stress from the outset that neither the department nor UKG have been involved in the formulation, drafting or discussion around the content of the policy. Therefore, our understanding and knowledge of the content is based primarily on our own scrutiny of the publicly available information, which was published by the European Commission website on the 7th of December 2023. In terms of background, we have been aware in the past number of years the Commission has been taking forward a significant programme of work to revise and update animal welfare legislation. As part of this work, the Commission conducted a survey of Member State citizens which showed that 44% own companion animals and 74% consider that the welfare of companion animals should be better protected. As it stands, EU member states do not have uniform rules on the breeding, keeping and selling of dogs and cats. Neither is there any EU-wide traceability system in place for dogs and cats. It is understood that there are serious concerns about the illegal trade in dogs and cats across the EU, and there is widespread support across Europe for legislation on the commercial keeping, breeding and selling of dogs and cats, and for harmonised traceability rules. In 2020, the European Parliament also adopted a resolution on legal trade in companion animals, calling for harmonised EU mandatory identification and registration of cats and dogs and improved protection of consumers purchasing companion animals via online platforms. I will now turn to the details within the proposal, including a broad overview of the policy aim, and then provide members with some detail on an article-by-article basis. The proposal aims to establish uniform EU rules for the welfare of dogs and cats that are bred or kept in breeding establishments, in pet shops and in animal shelters. It also sets minimum standards for the housing, care and handling of these animals across member states. Traceability requirements, along with the possibility for automated checks when supplying pets takes place, will make it easier for European government authorities to control the breeding and trade of these animals, and for prospective owners to verify the origin of their future pet, while increasing the chances that it will be physically and behaviourally healthy. Competent authorities will need to offer training for animal handlers in these establishments, and anyone buying a cat or dog will be informed about the importance of responsible ownership. Imports of cats and dogs to the EU from third countries will have to meet equivalent welfare standards. In terms of the details within the draft regulation, article by article, Articles 1 and 2 set the scope for the proposal, and that is to establish minimum requirements for the welfare of dogs and cats bred or kept in the establishments or placed on the union market, and the traceability of dogs and cats placed on the union market or supplied into the union. Article 4 sets out exemptions from the proposal. These include breeding establishments keeping 3 or 4 breeding female dogs or queen cats and producing in total 2 litters or less per year. Pet shops which keep at any given time 3 dogs or less or 6 cats and less are also exempt. And importantly, rehoming centres keeping at any given time 10 dogs or less or 20 cats or less are also exempt. Article 5 of the draft proposal is based on the established and recognised needs of animals, that is, dogs and cats being kept in any of these establishments must have suitable diet, accommodation, be kept with or apart from other animals, and be provided with appropriate care. Article 6 proposes that there will be restrictions on breeding animals with extreme physical characteristics which cause them suffering. This includes to regulate the breeding of flat-faced dogs like pugs which can develop breathing problems. Article 7 requires breeding establishments, pet shops and animal shelters to notify the competent authority of their location and provide details of the maximum numbers of dogs and cats which are kept there. Skipping to Article 16, which goes one step further, it requires mandatory inspection, approval and registration of dog breeding establishments by competent authorities in Member States. Going back to Article 8, would require information on responsible pet ownership to be provided to any person acquiring a dog or cat from a breeding establishment or a shelter. And it also proposes that online adverts carry a uniform warning that owning a cat or a dog is a lifetime responsibility. Article 9 sets out the competencies and training for people who are deemed to be animal caretakers in these sites and establishments, a caretaker being defined as a person who takes care of the dogs or cats that are bred there or in the establishment and animal shelters. Article 10 mandates that animal shelters must undergo an annual advisory visit by a vet for welfare purposes, so that's for rehoming and shelters. And Article 11 outlines that standards for providing feed and water to dogs and cats in breeding establishments or shelters, and minimum housing and for breeding establishments, pet shops and shelters is covered in Article 12. Articles 13 and 14 deal with the requirements to take care of the behavioural needs of the animals, and Article 15 will prohibit physical mutilations and painful practices, certain painful practices, for example, ear cropping, tail docking and similar types of procedures, which will be banned unless doing so would secure the health of the cat or dog. The regulation would also ban the use of muzzles other than for public health or animal safety reasons. Applying electric currents to dogs or cats would also be prohibited. This would outlaw the use of averse training devices such as shock collars. In addition, all cats and dogs placed on the EU market will have to be microchipped and registered in a national database, and these databases will have to be interoperable. This is to make it easier to search across all of these approved databases using a new single search portal to be developed by the European Commission. For online sales, suppliers will have to provide information on the identification and registration of animals through a website connected to the national databases, and this would allow buyers to verify the breeding background and veracity of the chosen cat or dog. The proposal states that the welfare conditions for cats and dogs entering the EU for the sole purpose of being sold must be equivalent to those set out in these proposals. In terms of timescales, the full outworkings of the legislative proposal as currently drafted would not necessarily take effect following ratification by the European Parliament and Council. Rather, the Commission is proposing that significant key features would become law in various stages, so it's not immediate. For example, competent authorities will have 3 years to establish and implement the databases for microchips, and Member States would have 5 years to ensure these databases are interoperable across the EU. In terms of the microchipping requirements for cats and dogs, it will apply 3 years after the regulation comes into force, and online selling platforms will have 5 years to provide the functionality to allow buyers to check the identities of the cats and dogs they're obtaining. The housing requirements, which would at this juncture primarily focus on the rehoming sector relating to space, light, temperature, etc., would apply 5 years after the regulation comes into force. And Article 13, which sets out measures to safeguard the health of cats and dogs, including minimum ages for breeding, would be 3 years after force. And finally, on the timescales, Article 16, requiring the approval and inspection of breeding establishments, again would apply 5 years after the regulation comes into force. So there's a number of timelines there. It's not all quite immediate. There are a wide number of areas where this European proposal would broadly mirror, complement or slightly augment existing Northern Ireland legislation. As you will have noted, the draft legislation aims to safeguard the welfare of cats and dogs in 3 settings of breeding establishments, pet shops and animal shelters. It also introduces needs for animals to be appropriately cared for, given the right diet and housing, etc. The regulation also provides to outlaw specific ways of handling a cat or dog or ways of treating a cat or dog which could cause harm. Based on this draft, we would contend that these matters are already dealt with in the Welfare of Animals Act, Northern Ireland 2011. Under the Act, any person who owns an animal or is in charge of an animal is responsible for its welfare. Section 9 of the Northern Ireland Act places an obligation for the owner or responsible person to provide a suitable environment, diet, the capacity for the animal to exhibit normal behaviour, the need for it to be housed or apart from other animals, and be protected from pain, suffering, injury and disease. Our Act also makes it illegal to treat an animal in such a way that it's subject to unnecessary suffering. And our own Act outlaws any mutilation which interferes with sensitive tissue or bone structure, meaning the dog's ears, for example, cannot be cropped or the cat cannot be declawed. Section 6 of our own legislation also prohibits tail docking of dogs for cosmetic reasons. In terms of commercial dog breeding here is already regulated activity, with requirements for establishments to be inspected and licensed, and a licence can only be conferred on the premises when it is deemed to have met the accommodation requirements. Dogs must have dedicated whelping facilities, must have access to suitable diet, must have establishment of a socialisation programme within the site, and there are strict rules on when a dog can breed and the frequency of the breeding. In addition, Northern Ireland was the first jurisdiction in the UK to already mandate the microchipping of dogs as part of the licence condition. Dogs born in Northern Ireland must be microchipped by the age of 8 weeks old, and any new owner must license the pup and update microchip details when they obtain the animal. And this all must be recorded on a database readily accessible by a council dog warden. That said, this draft proposal contains potential requirements which are not currently catered for in Northern Ireland domestic legislation, specifically so for the rescue and rehoming sector, which is not subject to regulation in Northern Ireland nor inspection. Therefore, the obligation to notify the competent authority of the activities of the rehoming or rescue centres is a new requirement. These organisations would also need to complete an annual vet visit and keep these records for 6 years. In addition, all persons deemed to be caretakers of animals under these proposals need to demonstrate a minimum standard of competence, and this can be achieved through their education or professional experience to be determined by the competent authority. There is also no existing definition of a commercial cat breeding establishment in domestic law, nor has there been a requirement for cat breeders to be inspected and registered, so this would be new and this would be a change. Members will also be aware that it is not as yet mandatory to microchip cats in Northern Ireland. If this regulation were to apply here, that would also need to be addressed. And likewise, there is no single database anywhere in the UK for identification of dogs, and microchipping of cats is not mandatory here either, but it is in England. And again, the department continues to promote responsible pet ownership and runs regular social media campaigns. A code of practice exists for both cats and dogs. However, this regulation would place an onus on those supplying dogs and cats and those advertising the sale of dogs and cats to provide information on responsible pet ownership. As I said at the outset, it's not yet been determined if this draft regulation would apply here until it completes the legislative process. Nevertheless, we continue to liaise with DEFRA colleagues who have initiated some engagement with the Commission on the content and potential interaction with the UK from a trade and movement perspective. And similarly, we have had informal conversations with DAFM colleagues to better understand some of the detail and intent of this potential regulation. And in closing, I hope that we have given members of the committee a useful short overview of the proposed regulation. We will endeavour to answer any questions you may have about the proposal. However, hope that members will appreciate and understand that we are not party to the development or the current status of the draft and potential application of the regulation when it is finally agreed at EU level and published in the official journal. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'll just get questions underway, and then I'll pass to members, if that's okay. Yeah. Just firstly, if the government anticipates that there will be financial impacts for DAERA and relevant animal activity businesses and charitable organisations to rehome dogs and cats. Could you speak further to your assessment of what those financial implications would be?
So at the outset, our initial assessment of financial implications would be that we would have to develop some form of a database that would be interoperable so that all microchipping could be registered in one place that we could then report to the Commission on a 3-year basis. So that would be developed by the department, and that would be additional expenditure. In addition, for the rehoming sector, they're not currently regulated, so they don't have to meet the same requirements as breeding establishments, for example, space and rehome or housing requirements, access for outdoor activities and space for animals. So they would have to invest, I would assume, a significant amount of money in some instances to come up to that standard that we expect currently from breeding establishments in domestic legislation, but that's what we required under the EU legislation as well. So that would probably be the main things. In addition, rehoming sector would have to have the annual veterinary visit, which would also be an additional cost, a one-off cost per year. I think that probably covers the main financial aspects.
The other aspect, Chair, I guess, is the requirement for the caretakers to have training. If that was formal training, there would obviously be a cost with that, but the regulation does make it clear that caretakers can obtain the competences by doing by means of experience or by sort of professional development. So that could well be that the Rescue and Rehoming Centre creates its own training programme. It maybe creates a video. It maybe gives the individuals materials that they develop. So it doesn't necessarily follow that there would be a hard cost for that training.
Thank you very much. The June 2020 or June 2024, the council agreed its negotiating mandate, but says that there was include some proposed changes. Would you be able to speak to the impact of any of the changes that were made?
I'm not aware of what changes were made when Corporate gave that mandate. From then until now, so we haven't been involved in or aware of negotiations, and indeed we haven't been kept up to contact with it. There was one meeting with the Commission facilitated by the UK Government where it was really just a broad information sharing exercise. It wasn't into the detail of the ongoing negotiations at European level, so I couldn't comment on that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. Jens, thank you very much for your information. It was really helpful. A couple of things. You've gone over the financial impacts. I'm also concerned on the other impacts there may be for charities like the Dogs Trust that we know kind of ship dogs to the mainland for rehoming on behalf of a number of the shelters here in Northern Ireland. Could you maybe outline for us some of the additional impacts there may be on charities like the Dogs Trust who do that initially? And then I've got a couple of other issues just.
I think it all largely depends on whether or not this regulation is adopted in Northern Ireland. If it is adopted in Northern Ireland, they'll have to adhere to the requirements as we've just ran through. But in terms of moving dogs to GB, because that would be deemed to be an internal UK movement, normal sort of UK legislation should apply. It'll be slightly different, I think, obviously, if animals are going into the European Union or into the Republic of Ireland, then obviously the requirements would have to meet the requirements as set out in this particular regulation, because that's clear that anything entering or going into the union market have to meet the requirements of the regulation, but not for movements to GB.
And vice versa.
I would surmise, yes, it'd be my understanding, if this was applied to Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland was deemed to be under the auspices of this particular regulation, then that might follow that is seen as a movement into the union. But look, this is purely guesswork at this point in time.
Appreciate we've long to go.
Yeah.
Could you just establish then, in terms of the database to which you refer, do you envisage that that's going to be a national database for the entirety of the UK, therefore the government will specify the specs that you're going to need, or?
We would have to specify what specifications, and there's certain within the regulation, there's draft rules about what kind of things need to be recorded for the animal, the age, the sex, etc. Yes. In terms of, as a competent authority and as a devolved matter, we would have to, at Northern Ireland level, develop the database ourselves. Now, whether that would be interoperable with a wider UK database, that would have to be determined if it applies here, and then in discussion with DEFRA. There's no plans for that at this juncture, but it was something we would have to look at. But certainly from a Northern Ireland perspective, we would have to ensure that's interoperable across Northern Ireland, and then of course we'd have further discussions about how that works at a UK-wide basis.
Just to sort of build on that, the nature of databases in Northern Ireland and indeed across the UK is that there are a number of databases. Microchip databases for dogs are operated on a commercial basis. So there are a number. So what database your dog ends up on depends primarily on who's microchipped your dog. So there have been ongoing conversations across all devolved nations and with the UK government for a period of time now preceding this regulation about whether or not there should be one overarching single point of search that spans all these databases to make it easier to look up microchips of dogs. So those sort of conversations are going on anyway. So there might well be a single UK point of search for databases, regardless of what happens with this regulation, because it is a sensible thing to do.
That's fair enough. And I do appreciate, Chairman, that we've got a ways to go on this still, but just supposed to have some understanding. They have outlined very specific proposals around breeders and so on, and you've indicated what the issues are in Northern Ireland. I suppose there's a couple of things I want to check. What is the existing threshold for licences for breeders in Northern Ireland?
It's broadly similar. So here for dog, so purely it's purely dogs. We don't license the breeding of cats. That's the first important distinction. So it does only apply to dogs. It's legislation that was enacted here in 2013, and it's only a person that is breeding keeps 3 breeding bitches and supplies 3 or more litters of pups a year that requires a license. So it's broadly similar. It looks very, very similar to the proposal in the European regulation.
Okay, and I suppose I want to put on the record, I'm not necessarily asking a question around this, but I do have concerns around, and it's been raised with us by the charities. There are issues around people in private homes are engaging in large-scale breeding. There are weaknesses in terms of the dog wardens because there are very small numbers of dog wardens for the scale of the problem. So as you look into all of this, is that going to be borne in mind just going forward? Because presumably you'll get an opportunity to feed in to the proposals.
Well, at this juncture, because it's moving at pace at the European level, I don't know how much we would have to be able to feed in to change or amend this. But it is worth to note that with the EU regulation, it makes it quite clear that anywhere that this applies, the competent authority can go above and beyond that. In terms of dog breeding, at the example that you have given, that would be something that we would have to be dealing with at a domestic level anyway. And our Minister has outlined his anticipated way forward for welfare for this business year with a commitment to meet the welfare organisations, including the Northern Ireland Companion Welfare Group, in the next few weeks to discuss what the welfare priorities of his department will look like until the end of the mandate. Dog breeding will be part of that discussion because we know it is an aspect that needs to be looked at, has been raised before. So in the round, regardless of this, it is something we'll be looking at.
That's great. It's really good to hear that the Minister's going to do that. Can I also just check finally with you in terms of it's okay having all of these regulations in place, but enforcement is always an issue.
Yeah.
So might there be costs to local government and PSNI and so on to be able to enforce all of this?
Well, ultimately, when new provisions come in under any legislation, whether domestic or EU, and you're required to enforce it, if people do not apply and do what they should be doing, there will be additional enforcement costs. It would be hard for me to estimate what they would be at this juncture, but it would be safe to say that with new provisions coming in, even in sort of microchipping of cats and the regulation of the rehoming centre, there would be additional enforcement costs. If this were to apply in Northern Ireland, when we look at enforcing that with obviously a domestic structure around penalties and offences, we would have to look at the regulatory impact assessment around that in terms of what it would cost us and our other statutory agencies. But I wouldn't be able to give you that at the minute, but it would be safe to say that there probably would be of some description.
Chair, it might also be helpful just to point out, Chair, and to members that the direction of travel across the UK is for the regulation of rescue and rehoming centres. Scotland has already enacted legislation to regulate that particular sector. As we sort of touched on in the presentation, England has already just introduced legislation to microchip cats. We believe Scotland is going to follow suit. Wales already have legislation in place covering shock collars. So a number of the activities or policy areas identified in this regulation, it is the general direction of travel at a UK level anyway, or they are things that have been enacted elsewhere in the UK.
No, look, I think that's great. I think that positive moves to prevent abuse and cruelty and all of those things, I think all of us welcome. It's just a pity that some of the sentencing wasn't implemented a bit more severely, but that's a separate matter for perhaps a different committee. Just in terms of enforcement then, it's one thing to talk around the costs. How enforceable are all of these in practical terms? Because
Yeah, I think it's in some ways open-ended because some of the things that we haven't done before. So, we'd have to go through that and understand what our enforcement approach would be once the provisions would be made applicable in domestic legislation. We do have robust enforcement procedures in place, working with our partners and local councils who are responsible for enforcement around dog breeding, for example. So a lot of those would apply directly over to the cat breeding elements of this proposal. In terms of the regulation of the rehoming sector, it is slightly different in the sense that breeding establishments apply for an annual licence, and a council inspector will go out to inspect. This is slightly different for rehoming centres in that they will have to apply by the regulation, but we won't be going out to inspect them on a yearly basis. So that's a slightly different kind of enforcement, albeit they were required to have a veterinary visit that's recorded and that is accessible in terms of the data for the competent authority for up to 6 years. So it's a different approach. So we'd have to assess how we would do it, but I think with anything we'll try and work with it and we'll make it enforceable as much as we can. There are there is a precedent in some areas for what we've done things like this before. Things that are new would have to work through the detail of that, but I don't think it is unenforceable. I think there are ways that we could work with it in order to make sure that it is applied and people do what they should do if it does indeed apply here eventually.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much. Just a couple of questions. They're quite technical, but I just want to sort of caretaker. Have we got an actual definition of what caretaker is likely to be?
Yes, it's included in the legislation. Broadly speaking, it's anybody who has a responsibility to look after an animal, yes.
Basically anybody.
Yes, and in those particular three settings, the three settings being a breeding establishment, a pet shop, or an animal shelter, which we would commonly refer to as a rescue rehoming shelter.
Okay, that's brilliant. The second one was, they keep on talking about the definition of the competent authority. Will the competent authority be local government, or will it be yourselves, if this came through?
In terms of progressing the legislation, it would be us as the competent authority, but it may be that some one of our stakeholder agencies or our partners are responsible for the enforcement of it. So at the minute, we are responsible for the dog breeding legislation, but local councils are responsible for the enforcement. So we are always the competent authority in that respect, but we may then, determining obviously if the proposals apply here, if it was indeed our enforcement partners in the council have to look after, for example, the cat microchipping or the cat regulation of breeding establishments, that may be them. We'd have to work through that detail yet, and we'd have to have engagement with them on that juncture first, and it goes back to the enforcement point and the availability of us to be able to do that.
And of course the other thing is, whoever is the competent authority will also have the annual inspections to manage, will have to make sure they're done properly, do all the reporting and do all that.
Yes, so there's an annual inspection required for licensing of breeding activities, which would be cat breeding as well. So the competent authority, the enforcement agency, would be doing that. And then, of course, with regards to the reporting, then I assume that for the European Commission reporting on a three-year basis, that will be us. We would bring together the data from councils or from the databases that we would establish and report up to the Commission that way. But yes, to answer your question, yeah.
So there would be there's a significant resource implication to.
I would imagine that we work through this and how we would enforce it. There would be resource implications for both the department and for our delivery partners in the councils.
Yeah, I noticed there's an awful lot of requirements for vets to do an awful lot of inspections, and one of the things that I think your department more than anybody has been very clear of, we don't have a lot of vets, and actually the number of vet availability is particularly low.
Yes.
The question I really have is, have we factored in the additional sort of inspection, the likely additional inspection, and the numbers particularly? It's one thing having the sort of councils doing it, but also it's very clear here that vets have got very particular roles and the rest of it, and we don't have that resource.
Yes.
Have we even thought about how we're going to look at that?
So we haven't went into that detail yet in terms of our analysis, but in terms of the proposals as they sit, our understanding of it is that the veterinary inspections apply to the rehoming sector only, not the breeding establishment sector, not pet shops. Pet shops are regulated by the department anyway, but the additional veterinary resource that we required because of these proposals would be an annual visit by veterinarians to the rehoming sector, so it wouldn't place that much of a burden on society as a whole, because it would be private veterinary practitioners. It's not necessarily the department doing that. It's a private transaction between the rehoming centre and the PVP.
That'll be an additional cost too.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed. And sort of the final question, I think it's been really questioned. I mean, how far do you? It's difficult at this stage because obviously this hasn't been enacted. We don't know the particular timescales. But with the exception of the inspection regime and microchipping of cats, we seem to be on that general path of travel. So those, and I don't want to put you on the particular spot, but just in general terms, we're on that path of travel anyhow. But the only really significant changes would be the inspection regimes and sort of the microchipping from where legislation is likely to go to at the moment.
I think, obviously, I can't predetermine what our minister would decide to do. I'm certainly for priorities to the end of the mandate. No, absolutely. Thanks, Stephen. But I think there is a point where a lot of our stakeholders, for a long period of time, have called for microchipping of cats, and that is something that many members have written to the minister on. I think there's also an aspect where the rehoming sector, for a long period of time, both rehoming organisations themselves have asked for some form of regulation and framework around which they operate. So the direction of travel in terms of what we see as the asks from wider public and stakeholders, I think would be aligned with what you've outlined, but whether we could commit to or not, I can't. The minister has to decide what his priorities are up until the end of the mandate, but I think that direction of travel, it would be fair to say, in terms of the key asks of the department, it would align with many of the proposals within this.
Basically, this is a 5-year pathway. We're already on a pathway, and actually what we're really looking at is there any significant divergence as we move along that pathway.
Broadly, I would suggest, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. I don't have any further indications. So moving on then. First, thank you for your time this morning. Much appreciated. And we'll let you go.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Members, then it's left to us to just to ask you whether you wish to continue to monitor the progress of this new proposed act as it progresses through the EU legislative system. Proposal, yep, happy to continue to monitor. Moving on then. Could I seek agreement then to request that the Department provides a revised assessment of any impact, if any changes to the Act are proposed, that the Council of the EU or European Parliament, which would have a significant impact specific to everyday lives of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist, and that the UK Government provides an update on its engagement with the European Commission as set out in paragraph 27 of its explanatory memorandum. And that RAISE is asked to monitor the progress of the proposal, including negotiations in the Parliament and Council, and submit quarterly updates, or more often as appropriate, to the committee.
And Chair, just through the Chair, could we also inform the DERA committee, just so that they're aware of, because it sits within DERA as well, but it would be something that would be significant interest to the populace in Northern Ireland. So if DERA were aware that we're also looking at it as well, I think it might be useful.
Members content with Steve's proposal? Yep. Thank you.
Extra work to do.
Just to remind members as well that the Democratic Scrutiny Committee also asked RAISE to identify a list of key stakeholders, which can be found at page 92 of your papers. It has been noted that NILGA is within that, but we may wish to include councils individually as well, if members are agreed. And Joanne?
And also, could I ask to add to that list, Causeway Coast Dog Shelter? They've been proactive in a lot of work around this, and they've had conferences here and so on that many of us were invited to, and I think it would be useful to include them.
Okay.
That'd be all right. And also support your proposal that would write to individual councils.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there are...
I'm not sure necessarily that it will always go from NILGA to each, so it's just, I think it's best to...
But let's cover our bases.
Sure. Just then to ask...
Do you want me to? Sorry. Normally we would ask stakeholders to comment on the proposal, but because the council has published its negotiating mandate, it would seem sensible to ask for views on that as well. If members are content.
Agreed. No problem. Then members will move to the next item of business, which is the proposed visit to Westminster, and ask Sinead again to speak to this.
Just to let members know, we'll in the next couple of weeks we'll be bringing a detailed cost and itinerary for the visit to Westminster, but it was really just to get confirmation at this stage of the dates which members wish to travel. Originally we had talked about the first week in December, so it's just to check if that still suits and which days will be the best. I think based on the itinerary that we had the last time, we'll need 2 days. So it's switch 2 days of that week if members still want to go.
First week of December.
First week of December, so that's Monday the 2nd of December.
Would you be content if we allow members to come back to you by email,
Yeah,
maybe
we can do that, yeah.
as soon as possible, to let you know whether that first week suits, and if it does, what days in particular suit members.
Yeah, in terms of days, I think it would have been the Wednesday, Thursday before that we would have been there, so we would have had to have a committee meeting at Westminster. But if those days are more suitable, it's the facilities are there to do that. So.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
Thank you, Chair. Great to be back, everyone.
We did welcome you earlier.
What particular days, I remember this being discussed originally, best suit what the purpose of the visit would be to ensure that we meet with the appropriate people?
Tuesday or Wednesday would probably be.
Well, I just would propose that we keep that in focus. There's no
Yep.
point
Yes.
going if
Yeah,
we're not
there's
going to
not-
meet the
that's
people
quite
that we
right,
need
yeah.
to see.
Yeah.
Point
Well,
going
we're
on.
first if we're doing a Zoom call, so
Yes.
factor that in whatever email,
Yeah, that's probably
that
right.
Yep.
the days in which we can maximise the purpose of our visit should be primary in our thoughts and consideration.
Any further questions, members?
Just, sorry, Chair, apologies. Just maybe, Sinead, when you're talking to the House of Commons, their committees they haven't yet sort of established all the committees and who there were, and I know the House of Lords would be quite keen to talk to us as well, and I think they're quite keen to make sure that their EU Brexit committee is re-established. And I know that the government whips have been talking back and forth, and I think there's the intention to do that. So there's no point in us going unless other actually committees have been, those committees have actually been formed. So we're only doing one visit,
Yeah.
but it just might be worthwhile doing that bit of liaisons just to see where we are.
Yeah, we're keeping in touch with them. I think the House of Lords are meeting, EU Affairs Committee are meeting on the 8th, so to make a decision. So we should know start next week what the
That's
situation
brilliant.
is there.
Okay, and if you've got any problems, just get back to me and I'll go
Yeah.
straight to.
Thank you.
That's great. Any further points or questions, members? No. Then moving on to the next item of business, which is correspondence. At page 97 of your pack is a response from the Chair of Committee on Procedures to the committee's request that standing orders be amended to allow for substitute members and proxy voting on this committee during the periods of recess. The chairperson has indicated that the matter is a key priority for the Procedures Committee and that it has received briefings on the issue and has commissioned a draft standing order to assist deliberations. The chairperson has proposed a meeting between the chairs and deputy chairs of both committees to discuss the matter further. And we are willing to discuss, so hopefully that meeting will be scheduled for early next week, and I think communications have already been undertaken on that basis. Then moving on to a page.
Just
sorry,
to
yes?
comment on that, I think that's very, very positive, and I
Yes.
think it's important that we ensure that both avenues are equally available, because there will be some content discussion, therefore the need for substitution, and in other cases it may be the case of proxy. So I think that is important, that we ensure that both avenues are concurrent rather than being one or the other.
Yes, and I think that is will certainly, from previous discussions here, likely be our intention, and that's I think that's going to be the crux of the discussions around that. So no, we will be pushing that direction. Any other points or questions on that, members? No. Moving then to 8.2, which is page 107 of your pack, a response from the UK government at the committee's request for an update on the transition of the UK internal market scheme and the establishment of Intertrade UK. You'll know that we've seen some progress on that recently with the appointment of Baroness Arlene Foster to be the chair of Intertrade UK, but important we continue to see progress in that. Any members content to note the response?
I'm content to know. Yeah.
Thank you. Moving on then to chairperson's business, I have nothing here. Any other business? I believe, Steve, you have.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much indeed. I wrote to the Chair and yourselves and reference an item of any other business I would like to have raised. People will, the committee be aware of the issue around not for EU labelling and the decision recent stages made by Her Majesty's Government, or His Majesty's Government. I think this is a matter of significance to everybody in Northern Ireland. Has been indicated both by sort of the retail sector, by logistics industries, and by wider consumer concern. I think that's an area that the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee should be investigating, because it is an area of significance. And I do not believe, having talked to the chair of the DERA committee this morning, that DERA the DERA committee are not looking at this particular issue. And I think it was a degree of significance. I think we should at least be taking matters to be informed of this issue. But that's my particular proposal as sort of chair.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, I would share your concern around the issue, as you will no doubt know. And I think it's important that the UK government urgently clarifies its position around this pause, and certainly that its wish to have a reset in relations with the EU as is no doubt a positive thing, cannot come at the expense of commitments that when it was both the previous government and when it was in opposition have made around the safeguarding the union paper. So I share that. I think we come up probably against a familiar issue that it's probably not an issue that sits strictly within the remit of what this committee has been tasked to do, and as you've indicated, probably more relevantly sits within the scope of some of the statutory committees. I don't know whether you feel we should write to perhaps Deirdre on this, or
Like the economy, maybe?
well, I'll bring I think there's if you have a proposal on how we progress that, but I'm just going to come over to Declan first, if that's.
Thanks, David. Well, welcome to the legacy and the consequence of Brexit. That said, I do think that your introductory remarks are salient. So, however we react to what Steve has raised needs to be absolutely set within the scope and the remit of this committee, and therefore, in that context, I would suggest that we take advice from the clerk to the committee in relation to how she views the interface of this issue with our remit and within our scope to ensure that we do not depart from what in fact we're charged with doing.
Okay.
Happy the clerk speaks to it.
Sort of back in, Chair.
Yes. Sorry.
I think, looking particularly at the remit of this committee, there's issues with the sort of EU regulations and how EU regulations are evolving. That would mean that perhaps this committee could look to ask RAISE to do some research on this particular area and the impact that area's research is likely to have as it moves forward. You know, we don't do enough. You know, I've said this quite publicly from the floor, and I'll make no bones about it. You know, we're too incurious about some of these things that are coming along, things like applicability mission, about malnutrition, other issues to do with it as well. I believe that asking RAISE would be a useful area to see if where these likely implications are, because regardless of whether we decide to take a narrow view or otherwise, the expectation of the people from Northern Ireland is that the Northern Ireland Assembly is doing some oversight and review of this issue. And actually just asking RAISE to do some of the research, I think, would be a valuable contribution that this committee could make. And if it comes from nothing, that's where we are. But at least we've been shown to be able to do something as well. And that's the formal proposal I would make through the chair. And if that was the case, you know, if we have to put it to a vote, I'll put it to a vote.
Thanks, Steve. I'll come back to that proposal in a moment if the clerk wants to speak.
Well, I suppose Schedule 6B of the 1998 Act gives this committee a very specific role, and that's assisting with the observation and implementation of Article 13.3, Article 13.4, and that's the context within which this committee operates. So EU exit issues fall to the relevant statutory committees, and it's important, I suppose, that we don't stray into that. And if the main issue here is around trade and consumer choice, the issue might more properly fall to economy. And I suppose that's my reading of it.
Chair, I made a formal proposal, so.
Repeat it.
Yeah, I'm happy to move forward with Steve's proposal. Do you have a seconder for the proposal?
I'm happy to second
No,
Steve's proposal, and if he would permit the inclusion of also that we do write to the relevant statutory committees as well. So you've already mentioned that Deirdre, for
Deirdre
example,
and economy.
Yeah. So because I know there is a particular
And the executive committee.
Probably.
I think there's nothing to lose for the committee to draw this to the attention of the three committees that has been mentioned. But also, again, there's nothing to be lost in a raised paper which can highlight this matter and perhaps further inform members as this worry and development continues, because we're already being told that the potential for a reduction in consumer choice is inevitable from the decision. So I think that does not in any way
Which will result in an escalation of prices actually for consumers.
So I would, if Steve's happy to add that to that proposal, I'm more than happy to say it.
Just to clarify the proposal so I can write it.
Steve, do you want to clarify specifically the proposal?
Specific proposal that this committee invites RAISE to do research on the implications of the decision on not for EU labelling, and to inform the relevant committees, of which we believe that is DERA, Economy, TEO, of our request for gathering of information.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Owen?
Chair, just to come in off the back of the clerk's comments and Declan's comments, we have a very specific role, and that is around scrutinising, amending and replacing EU acts or new EU acts. This is neither. This is a UK government decision. And Declan's right, this is a direct consequence of Brexit. And if this committee wants to go down every single rabbit hole and open Pandora's box about every consequence of Brexit in every department and every area of our economy, we'll never be done meeting. It's not about incuriosity, it's about ensuring that the correct statutory committee is looking at these issues in detail rather than us taking a scattergun approach and just merely scratching the surface. It's also worth saying that the decision that has been taken follows a sweetheart deal between one party in this assembly and an untrustworthy UK government. And so I don't think it's right for this committee now to start to go down that rabbit hole. I think it's entirely appropriate for us because there are concerns about consumer choice, and I'm not glib about the potential consequences, but it's appropriate that that is referred to the Economy Committee so that they can do the proper and detailed scrutiny in terms of the potential consequences. We need to remain focused on what we're established to do, and that is to look at EU legislation. And my view would be that that's where our focus should lie. And if we need a further raise report commissioned, it's for the Economy Committee to commission that.
Well, even aside the final point, which is probably the most salient one, just speaking from personal basis, that I don't think that I think the proposal actually recognises that this we had that discussion and that this isn't and Declan referred to it, that it's not the role of this committee to undertake an investigation into these things. So I think what Steve's proposal is to commission advice which would be open to anyone in the Assembly to access, and also in doing that to inform the relevant committee. So I just think I don't think anyone's proposing at this stage that this committee undertakes that full investigation, but I understand your last point as well, Declan.
David, I don't think that we need to clutter the entry of this committee by commissioning that research. If Steve wants that research as a member, and Johnny the same, you're perfectly at liberty to go and get that research carried out through the relevant agency. And then, of course, if it is going to overlap sensibly with the work of this committee, to bring that information and to share it with the rest of us. But in terms of the statutory function in relation to the commissioning of the research, I agree with Owen. That's a role for the Economy Committee if it considers that its scope extends to that requirement.
Well, look, I've heard enough to know that there's a division in the committee on this point, so I think we'll undertake a vote.
Yes, Chair, let's formally record.
Yes.
Do you want to record then on Steve's proposal?
So on Steve's proposal, which is that the committee invites Ray's.
Sorry, that the DSE commissions research and raise on the implications of the decision of the UK government on the not for EU labelling, and inform relevant committees of the request for research.
So members for that proposal?
Okay.
Members against?
Casting vote, David?
Casting vote, Chair.
No.
What a day.
Okay, we have David Brooks, Jonathan Buckley, Joanne Bunting, Steve Aiken. Ayes. Noes, we have Declan Kearney, Emma Sheeran, Owen Tennyson and Kate Nicholl. So the proposal falls.
Thank you, members. Moving on then to the next item of business, which is the date, time and place of the next meeting. Just to inform members, the next meeting of the committee has been scheduled for Thursday the 10th of October at 10 a.m. in room 30. Just left now, members, to adjourn the meeting. Okay. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound.